Okay, today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin Daf Ayin Daled. Today's daf is dedicated to all the families in Israel who are going through immeasurable suffering over the last few weeks. Our hearts are with you. Okay, we are now going to, before we start, I just want to announce about the Siyum. It's been a little late in getting the Siyum going, but we are planning a Siyum. Ezrat Hashem, we're finishing Kiddushin next week. So the Siyum will be, I mentioned it once before, but I'll mention it again on Sunday, November 5th. The registration has not gone up. It should go up by later today. So you can check on the website, or if you're in the WhatsApp groups, you'll get a link to register. If not, it'll be up soon, but God willing, it will be on November 5th. Racheli Sprecher-Frankel is going to be speaking at the Siyum, and looking forward to having a very meaningful Siyum and appropriate for the times that we're going through right now. Okay, I think that's it for announcements. There might be a few local Siyumim going on. If basically our Siyumim this time are going to be, the Hebrew one will be on Zoom and the English one will be on Zoom. The Hebrew one will be on Thursday. As I mentioned before, on Friday morning next week, which should really be the day of the last day of Kiddushin, since it's Friday and we don't need to learn the last daf because we'll learn it at the Siyum on Sunday. We'll be doing the first daf of Baba Kama, okay, as opposed to posting it on the Shabbat daf. We'll do it live on Friday morning on Zoom. So anybody who wants to join can join the Zoom for the Shabbat daf. And as usual, it'll be up on Friday morning for Shabbat for those who aren't on the Zoom. Okay, getting started with our daf. We're dealing now with issues of who is believed about what. So in all situations we talked about is a midwife is believed to say which of the twins came out first, or if there's different children, she can say this one was a Kohen, this one was a Levi, etc. But to an extent, right, we said only when it comes to the Bechor, only immediately. After that, we're worried that she might get confused. And really what we're dealing with here, and a lot of the sugiyot today, part of them have to do, or at least in the first part of today's stuff, have to deal with memory issues. Okay, so for example, Ne'eman Bala Mekach, we're now at the bottom of Ayin Gimel Amud Bet, someone who is selling an item. They're believed to say, let's assume someone gave him money for a purchase, or someone gave her money, and that storekeeper is believed to say, before they, right now they want to give the item, and two people claim, I bought this item from you. So the storekeeper is believed to say, no, I know it was you who bought it and not the other person. But they're only believed in which case? Again, how long do we assume a storekeeper will remember who bought what? As long as the item is still in their hands, then it will work. Let's say I own a store and I sold an item to someone, and then next day, two people come fighting over this item and they say, hey, Michelle, we bought this from your store. Each one claiming I'm the one who bought it. At that point, I'm not believed. Because the assumption is if I already gave it to the person, I put it out of my mind. I don't remember it anymore, because why do I need to remember who bought things yesterday from my store, right? What do I need to remember? If I still have to give the item to someone, I'm going to remember that you're the person that I sold it to, so that I remember to give you the money. But if you already gave me the money and I already gave you the item, I don't need to keep this in my memory, right? I clean it out of my memory and I move on. So we don't assume that the next day I'm going to remember, to which they say, what do you mean? I still should remember, because I should probably still remember who gave me money. If one of them paid me and one of them didn't pay me, I'd recognize, I'd say, wait, you look familiar. You don't. You didn't ever give me any money. So in which case I really should be believed even later. To which they say, lo tzricha dinaka mitravai. No, it must be that I got money from both of you. But one I intended to sell to you. The other one, I said, no, I don't. Let's say you both wanted the same item. I only have one in the store. I agreed to one. The other one insisted. And I said, listen, I can't sell it to you. I already sold it to somebody else. And then they insisted and gave me the money anyway. So at that point, the next day I might remember that both of them gave me money. I just won't remember, right, which one gave me the money that I agreed to the sale with and which one didn't. So again, that would be if I already gave the item. If I didn't give the item yet, then no. But if I already gave the item and they both gave me money, then when they come back the next day or whenever it is, I'm not necessarily expected to remember which one. Okay, so that's the case. Lo yadia hemi midato v'hemi lo midato. And then I'm not expected to remember which one gave it to me that I was willing to sell it to and which one I wasn't. Next case. A judge is believed to say, we had a case in court and you were the one who was responsible to pay the money to the other guy. But when this case, what case? This is if they're still in court. Okay, we had a ruling, I ruled, and then a few minutes later, you're still in front of me, and then there's a whole debate. This one said, what do you mean? I said, you're supposed to give the money to me. The other one said, no, you're supposed to give the money to me. I can be believed to say, no, you and not you. But once they leave my courtroom, I'm not expected to remember who, what, right? How many cases come in front of me a day? How am I supposed to remember who was guilty, who was innocent? Now the Gemara is going to have two questions on this. Why don't we just isn't there, don't they write down a ruling from the court? So why don't we just take out the records? It must be a case where the records were torn up for some reason. Well, if we really don't know, then why don't we just say, let's just bring them back and I'll judge them again. And the assumption is, if I ruled that you were innocent and the other one was guilty, right? You have to pay money. You're supposed to get money from the other person. Well, basically, we'll just do it again, and obviously, I'll come to the same conclusion. So why don't it, right? If it's a case where they already left and we don't know, why don't we just rejudge the case? To which the answer, we're talking about a case where it's up to the judge's discretion. In other words, now here there's a big machlok at Rashi Tosa. Rashi says it's up to the logic of the judge. Sometimes there's not enough evidence, and the judge just has to use their common sense to make a decision. And then, therefore, if we do it again, it might not come out the same way. Tosa says, what do you mean? If I'm using my common sense, chances are I would come to the same conclusion. So Tosa says, Shudid D'Dayne, and this comes up, by the way, a big machloket about what Shudid D'Dayne is anytime we use it. Sometimes Tosa goes more in the direction that this is something that really, it's sometimes arbitrary. The judge can arbitrarily choose who's going to win when it's not so clear, because of Hefker Beit and Hefker, they have the rights to move money from one person to another, even if, really there's no reason. In which case, since it wasn't necessarily done by such a logical decision, more, not exactly impulsive, but it could be sort of a little bit impulsive, like it's sort of just up to the discretion to do it as they see fit. It could be that if we redid it, I might come to a different conclusion. Okay, and that's why they say in the end, that's why we're basically, right, the judge isn't believed, and there's really no, right, there's no way to resolve it after that. Amravna. Now we're going to go back to this firstborn. There's three people who are believed for a bechor, but each one for a different time frame. Okay, now you might remember we learned this law about yakir. Okay, when it comes to the section of the Torah that talks about if a man has two wives, one is loved and one he hates, which we mentioned a whole bunch of times, it says he can't, right, decide that he's going to give the bechorah to the younger son, who's the oldest of the wife he loves. But it says yakir, he has to recognize the one of the older, the daughter of the hated wife, to give him the double portion. Now, because it says yakir, he recognizes he is the one who basically is believed about choosing who's right, about saying this child is a firstborn. So whether it's twins, and there's a little lack of clarity which twin came out first, or, for example, let's say a man gets married, has kids, oldest son is a boy, and then later on, they start discussing the inheritance, and he says, yeah, I'm going to get double portion. And the father says, what are you talking about? I have a son from a different marriage that you didn't even know about. He's believed to say that. That's usually the case, that the father claims, oh, by the way, you might not have known this, but I have some son from another marriage, and therefore you're not the bechor. So Amar Rav Nachman, there's three people who are believed when it comes to bechor. Elohen, Chaya, the midwife, that we already learned, which is only immediate. Chaya, Aviv, V'imo, father and mother. Chaya la'alter. The midwife is believed immediately. Imo kol shiva. The mother gets the first 7 days. Okay, whether this is connected to the bris or not, I don't think so. But the first 7 days of the baby's life, we assume the mother's the one who recognizes the child much more than the father. The father hasn't had much access to the children yet to be able to know. Again, we're talking, let's say, in a twin situation, who is who. But aviv la'olam. But once, and most people explain it, I'm going to go with this commentary, that the father, even though it doesn't say this, but only kicks in on day 8. Okay, before day 8, the baby's kind of more in the domain of the mother, and the mother knows much more than the father about things. Once day 8, it reverts to the Torah general laws of the father is believed. Okay, it's not to say the mother loses her credibility. It's just that the Torah basically gave the power to the father in this word yakir, which we're going to see in a minute, which means that the father really has jurisdiction. It's just that the mother has rights to do it the first 7 days, because the assumption is she knows the baby much more, and she knows who's the bechor much more than the father in those 7 days. Kiddushin, again, that would really be in a case of twins. Yakir, yakirenu la'achirim. They say the word yakir here, again, says, ki et bechor ben hasnua yakir latet lo pishnayim. Okay, the one who's the elder son of the daughter of the hated wife, which is really, he's the older one in general, according to the, right, in this case that the Torah is describing, yakir latelo. He recognizes him to give him the double portion. So now, yakir means not just he recognizes, he can say it for himself, but yikirenu la'achirim. He's the one who believed in front of other people to declare this child a firstborn. Mikan amar Rabbi Yehuda, and from here Rabbi Yehuda learned, Ne'eman adam lomar ze b'nei b'chol. Okay, so a father can say, this one is the firstborn. Ukashem shene'eman. Now, Rabbi Yehuda takes it one step farther. He says, just like a father is believed to say, my son is a bechor, he can also say, this is the daughter of a woman who was a divorcee with me. I'm a Kohen, and you might not have known this, but she actually was divorced before she married me, or she did chalitza before she married me. So he's believed to say that, okay? Just like he's believed to say, what Rabbi Yehuda does is he extends this din of yakir, not just for bechol, also for disqualifying his son from being a Kohen. Chachamim said, no. Yakir is specifically for firstborn, has nothing to do with saying your son's pasul. And if it's just the father's testimony saying, oh, by the way, my wife was a divorcee and his mom was a divorcee, we don't believe him. Unless there's witnesses that saw she got divorced, we don't take his testimony. So there's a machloket about that. Now we're going to go back to the Mishna. In the Mishna, we're going to still keep with this issue of ne'emanut, who's believed, but we're going to move it into a different area, which is in the Mishna. The end of the Mishna said, Abba Shaul haya koreh l'shtuki beduki. Okay, we talked about the shtuki, which is, we know the mother, we don't know the father. Either she's unmarried or she was betrothed but not married, because, right, either she was totally single or she was betrothed. Once she's married, we assume the baby. It's a case where we know the mother, we don't know the father. Once she's married, we assume any child she has, the chances are it's her husband, so we don't really have a suffix here. But in this case, shtuki, it's a case where we don't, she wasn't married. So now it says that Abba Shaul called a shtuki a beduki. So what? Like what the Mishna is just telling us, he called a shtuki a beduki. Okay, what's the meaning? So my beduki, why is he call it a beduki? Lema, they're going to say, if you want to say, which usually rejects this possibility, but in this case, they're going to suggest this, raise some problems with it, but in the end, ultimately, this is going to be the way they understand it. What it means is a beduki means, beduk means to check. So what it means is when you have a shtuki, you check. How do you check? You ask the mother, who's the father? And if the mother says the father was someone who is not a yichus problem, right? He wasn't a mamzer, he wasn't, right, anyone I wasn't allowed to marry, then she's ne'emenet. Okay, she's believed, and then this child becomes 100% perfect. Okay, what the point of a shtuki is, if the mother doesn't say anything, then we don't know. But if we check with the mother and the mother says, yeah, the father was a kosher person, then we have no problem of the yichus of this child. Now let's go back. We were in the middle of a phrase. If you want to say that's the case, well, we have a problem. What's the problem? It's not that this is wrong. It's that we already learned this in another Mishnah. You might remember in the beginning of Masechet Ketubot, we had a whole slew of Mishnayot where Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer said, we believe this kind of claim. And Rabbi Yoshua came and said, Lo mi pia anu chayim. We don't trust this woman to say what she said. And one of the cases are exactly our case. So now, if you're going to say that this woman's believed to say her kid's a kosher status, well, we already have another Mishnah that says this. And in fact, we know we paskin like the opinion that says this. So what's Abba Shaul add? That's going to be our gist. So now they're going to say, Kima, Rabban Gamliel. You want to say that Abba Shaul holds like Rabban Gamliel on this issue? The Mishnah already says this, and the assumption is Rabbi Yehuda and Nasi put together the Mishnah. He doesn't need to mention two Mishnayot that say the exact same thing. Ditnan. What does it say there? If she's pregnant and they ask her what's the nature of this child or the fetus. If she says he's from this and this person and he's a Kohen, which we learned at the time, it doesn't really mean he's a Kohen, it just means he has good lineage. Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer, they both say she's believed. Rabbi Yeshua says, no way, no how. We don't trust this woman. And we pass like Rabban Gamliel. So now we're left with this question. If you want to say that's what Abba Shaul is saying, we already know that we hold like Rabban Gamliel, and it's Rabban Gamliel's in the Mishnah there. Why would we mention it here? To which the Gemara answers, well, there's two issues here. If she was with a man who's disqualified, that, okay, let's say she had a relation with a mamzer, and this child is now going to be a mamzer, or not, or was a good child. So if, right, she's claiming it's good. Now, if she's believed not to, now there's two issues here. Number one is the child. What's the status of the child? Number two, a woman who has relations with a mamzer or anyone who's disqualified basically disqualifies herself from marrying a Kohen. So now we say the following. What does it mean she's believed? She's believed to what? To not disqualify her from marrying a Kohen, or to not disqualify her child from being a mamzer, right? There's two issues here. So we have two Mishnayot about this. One is saying if we only have one, we think maybe it just means that she's not disqualified for marrying a Kohen. We believe her for her own sake, but maybe we don't believe her, and maybe her daughter we have to assume is a problem. So that's what Abba Shaul is saying. He's talking about the child. The child is a beduki, meaning you can check with the mother and believe the mother as regards the child. This answer that one is this and one is that only works if you hold it works if you hold that anyone who says, right, she's kosher, the mother, still, in other words, there's cases where we might not say the mother's disqualified, but we'll still say the child is disqualified. In other words, we might allow the mother to marry a Kohen, but we might not necessarily allow this child to marry anyone they want. So if those two don't go hand in hand, that's basically what it's saying. There's one opinion that says those two things don't go hand in hand. And then it makes sense that we have one Mishnah talking about that and one Mishnah talking about that. But there is an approach that says anyone who basically says, oh, we can assume you were in a relationship with a sexual relationship with a kosher person, then obviously means that the daughter's kasher. Those things go hand in hand. So if you say that she's okay, then the daughter's okay, then you don't need two Mishnayot to say those two different things, because then it's all one and the same. So Abba Shaul, so according to that track, what's Abba Shaul telling us that we couldn't have derived from the first Mishnah? To which they're going to give a second answer. Again, there's two tracks. Either you say, one is to say she's okay, that's the Mishnah, she's believed about herself. And then our Mishnah is to say she's also believed about the child. But if you think those two things go hand in hand, you don't need two Mishnayot. So what's the answer? Abba Shaul adifa midei Rabban Gamliel. He is stronger than Rabban Gamliel in what sense? If we would have had just the Mishnah in Ketubot, Hava Mina. Now I said the shtuki could be from two types of relationships. Either she's not married at all, or she's betrothed to someone, right? But then we don't assume the majority of be'ilot she has of sexual relations are with her husband, so therefore it doesn't go by the husband. But those two are very different situations. So if you just have Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer, you would have thought Havamina Hatam derov ksherim etzla. That's when she's single, and therefore we trust her because the fact is almost every man in the world is permitted to her, just not all the mamzerim, all the natinim, and anyone who's her relative, right? Those would all create mamzer children. But that's not the majority of the world. If she's single, the majority of the world is permitted to her. Let's say she was betrothed. You might have thought, if you just had that Mishnah, you might have thought, when she's betrothed, everyone in the world is forbidden to her, except for her husband, right? And he's only going to be permitted once she's married. So in that case, since the chances are 99.9% of the men in the world are forbidden to her right now, so there's more likelihood that the child's actually disqualified and her. So therefore, sricha. That's what our Mishnah is coming to tell you. No, even if she's betrothed, we're still going to believe the will. And Amarava halachaka Abba Shaul. Okay, end of sugya. So what we did so far today, just to review this first section, is we started off with different people who are believed, a storekeeper, a judge, who's believed about a bechor, okay, right? What are the assumptions we make about which people, right, know the facts on the ground and will remember things, right? To what extent will they remember? To how long will they remember, etc. Then we talked about this Abba Shaul and what is Abba Shaul coming to say? And in essence, is really saying the same thing as Rabban Gamliel, but in case, right, one is talking about one and maybe one is talking about, right, her or the daughter, or perhaps it's in the end that whether she's pregnant and she's single, or she's pregnant and after she's already been betrothed. Okay, and maybe that's the difference, but in any case, it's saying the same thing. It's just including another possible case. Now we're going to get to a bit more complicated section, and there's a study guide about this section of the daf. So you can look at the study guide on today's daf, which has a big chart about what's going to be between now and almost the end of the daf. So we have, and I'll probably end before the next section. So we have a Mishnah, which is going to be a very complicated Mishnah to understand. It doesn't sound complicated, but the content is going to make no sense really, or have several questions raised against it. And then the Gemara is going to suggest, if 4 different rabbis are going to suggest 4 different interpretations of the Mishnah, each one is going to be rejected except for the last, even though the last one in the end really changes the simple reading of the Mishnah. So here comes our Mishnah. It's a classic case where we have a Mishnah that doesn't make sense, and then we have to figure out what on earth is going on. Okay, that sounds pretty simple. Anyone who can't get married within the community, right, is allowed to marry each other. Now, what's the problem? Well, that's basically what we said in the previous Mishnah. Like a mamzer and a teen and all those people, a shtuki and a sufi, right, they can all marry each other. That's what the Mishnah had said. Rabbi Yehuda Osel. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, they can't. Okay, that's a little strange. When a mamzer can marry a mamzer, okay, we don't know what he's saying. Third opinion, Rabbi Eliezer Omel, vada'an bevada'an mutar. Okay, let's just assume we're talking about mamzer. A definite mamzer and a definite mamzer are permitted to each other. But you can't have a safek and a vadai, like a shtuki and a mamzer. Or you can't even have a shtuki and a shtuki, because one shtuki might be a mamzer and one shtuki might be kosher, and then you're going to have a kosher person with a mamzer. So he says no safek and vadai can mix in, even though we did say before a shtuki can marry a shtuki, and we also said a shtuki can marry a mamzer, but he says no, those can't work. Right, so he has a different opinion here. What are the sfekot that we're talking about? Shtuki, asufi, and kuti. He adds kuti to the list also, the shomroni. We're not sure always what their status is. So now we have to understand why this is Mishnah talking about. First, we're going to raise a bunch of questions, and then as we move to Amud Bet, we're going to start with the 4 different opinions. What does it mean anyone is forbidden to come into the community, right? Which we assume we know what that means, but it's a problem. It's that whole list that we saw in the previous Mishnah. Hatana lereisha. We already just saw that in the previous Mishnah. So it's very clear. Anyone who can't come in is permitted to marry each other. We just saw that. So this Mishnah can't possibly be saying that because it's a repeat of what we just saw. Vitu. Question number 2. Rabbi Yehuda Osel, what is he forbidding? Ahaya, on what is he referring to? Right? The obvious would be to say he forbids a shtuki and a mamzer, right? He permits mamzer to mamzer. That's clear because everyone does that. So what must he be forbidding? A vada and a safek. Well, that's exactly Rabbi Eliezer. So what could Rabbi Yehuda be saying that's different from Rabbi Eliezer? Hamid Katani say for Rabbi Eliezer Omer vada'am bevada'am mutal. Vadai b'sfekan b'sfekan asul michad Rabbi Yehuda lo sfirale. It must be Rabbi Yehuda holds something different entirely. So both those things raise problems. And question number 3, the obvious answer would be what? Now, what do we know about Rabbi Yehuda? Remember we learned a machlok of Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi about a ger that marries a mamzeret? Remember, so Rabbi Yehuda had said a ger cannot marry a mamzeret. So maybe that's what it means, Rabbi Yehuda Osir. The chitema Rabbi Yehuda Osir a ger b'mamzeret, that a ger, remember, it's a machlok, is a ger considered part of the community or not considered part of the community? If you say he's not part of Kal Hashem, then a ger can marry a mamzer. And that was, remember, the rabbis, Rabbi Zera taught that and got pelted with etrogim because people got all upset. That's very offensive to say about gerim. But Rabbi Yehuda said specifically, a ger can't marry a mamzeret. He says a ger is definitely part of Kahal Hashem, and therefore, of course, can't marry a mamzeret. So maybe when it says Rabbi Yehuda Osel, that's what he's saying. But what's the problem? What is the language of the Mishnah? Right? Miti ger b'mamzeret katane? It says specifically all people who can't come into the community. That obviously doesn't mean only converts, because if it was only converts, it would have said converts, right? It doesn't mention converts at all in the Mishnah. It just says all those people who can't come in the kahal. Now, by the way, a ger can come in the kahal also. So it doesn't make any sense because a ger can marry a Levi, a Yisrael, right? A Gioret can't marry a Kohen, but even a ger can marry a Bat Kohen. So it's weird, okay? This doesn't make any sense. The first 2 answers are going to basically say that we are talking about a ger shenasa mamzeret, and they're just going to have to explain what do the words mean, kol shasulin lavo b'kahal, and how does it refer to ger. So Amar Rav Yehuda, turning now to Amud Bet, Haki Kamar, this is how you should read. Kol ha'asulin lavo b'kahal kehuna. He changes this to say, all who are forbidden to marry kohanim, like a gioret, okay, like a convert, my ninhu, who is this? What they're basically saying is the Mishnah is referring to a convert who converted from the age of 3 and up. I'm sorry, even under the age of 3 and up, Okay, this is just an aside, and we're going to talk about this aside for a minute, another 2 more minutes here in the Gemara. But what they're saying is, if you remember, we had this whole discussion about a convert, a female convert who converts under the age of 3. Okay, so she never, okay, let's go to over the age of 3. Over the age of 3, a woman potentially, according to halacha, again, hard to understand this always, but according to halacha, a woman theoretically is what we call ru'uya l'biyah. She could theoretically have sexual relations. She's developed enough that there's a meaning to a sexual act with a woman of that age. Again, not to say that one should or anything else, but potentially if someone were to, then yes, then we would call that sexual relations, which means that there's a concern that if she wasn't Jewish, perhaps she'd engaged from the age of 3 in sexual relations, which would disqualify her to a Kohen, because then she'd be in the category of a zonah. So we basically rule any convert from the age of 3 and up, and this is one opinion, from the age of 3 and up is basically not allowed to marry a Kohen. Okay, now, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, so now we have this debate. What about if she's under the age of 3? And in fact, we rule this way, that even under the age of 3, we don't, it's called kind of like lo plug, we don't make any distinctions. Any girl who converted, it doesn't matter what age she converted, can already not marry a Kohen, okay? Even though theoretically she couldn't have even had biyah, even if she did, it wouldn't be. We just kind of rule blanket, giorot are not allowed. Female converts cannot marry Kohanim. So now, what are they saying here? Let's go back to the beginning. Who is asurin lavo b'kal kuna? That is any gioret under the age, even under the age of 3, okay? And not like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, okay? Because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai rules that only from the age of 3 is she disqualified to marry a Kohen. Okay, in a minute, we're going to say, why did we have to say it like this? Why didn't we say just from the age of 3 and then it would match Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? So we'll get there in a minute. And the point is, so now we're going to get to this clear machloket Rabbi Yehuda and Tanakama. Tanakama is Rabbi Yossi, that anyone who's a female convert who converted, it doesn't matter at what age, is forbidden to a Kohen, again, against Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who thinks only from 3, is forbidden to marry a Kohen and is mutarim zebazeh, right? In other words, mutarim lavo zebazeh means she can marry a mamzer because she's a convert. And according to Rabbi Yossi, converts can marry mamzerim. To which and then Rabbi Yehuda Oser, that's classic Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, she can't marry a mamzer because she's part of Kal Hashem. To which, before we get to questions on this approach, we're first going to go off on an aside about this 3-year thing and say, why did you say it was from the age of 0? Why didn't you just say it's from the age of 3? And then it would match all the opinions. It would include even Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. To which they say, no, they couldn't have said that because in Kain mitzidat havra, we would have destroyed this explanation from within. Okay, what does that mean? Well, because if you say that it's only from the age of 3, it would sound like the following. It would sound like specifically because she's 3 and she can't marry a Kohen, that's why she's permitted to marry a mamzer. But what conclusion would you come to? You would think, though, if she converted under the age of 3, and since it matches Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, what would we say? Well, then she's permitted to the Kohen. And then what's the conclusion? If she's permitted to the Kohen, then she's forbidden to mamzer, right? This sets up that if you're forbidden to a Kohen, you can marry a mamzer, which sounds like if you're permitted to a Kohen, you can't marry a mamzer. Now, if you say that, she's permitted to a Kohen, but then you would say that she's then forbidden to mamzer. Now, that's not true. The issue of the 3 and under 3 over 3 is only an issue for is she considered a potential. Possibly she's a zonah, and therefore we don't allow her to marry a Kohen since we don't know anything about her history. But when it comes to a ger, whether a ger can marry a gioret, a female convert can marry a mamzer or not, has nothing to do with the age of what age she converted. And the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, muteret lavo b'kal kuna, she can marry a Kohen, but also muteret lavo zebazeh. She can also marry a convert according to Tanakama, which is Rabbi Yossi. In other words, the issue of the convert and the 3 years is an irrelevant issue. So the Mishna wouldn't make any sense if we filled in only from age 3, right? She's forbidden to a Kohen and therefore permitted to mamzerim. It would sound like under age 3, she's actually forbidden to mamzerim, and it's not true because, again, not according to Rabbi Yehuda, but according to Rabbi Yossi, which Tanakama matches him according to this interpretation, right? They go that she basically can't marry. She can marry a mamzer even though she can also marry a Kohen. So this wouldn't make sense. So that's why they picked from birth, because they want an issue that applies from birth, and therefore it just doesn't hold by Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. That was all an aside. But getting back to the main topic. So according to this, kol hasurin lavo b'kahal isn't b'kahal, it's b'kahal kuna. Anyone who can't marry a Kohen is, right, like a convert, is permitted to marry a mamzer. Okay, which basically means, in simple language, right, much simpler than the Mishnah, ger no say mamzer. Okay, or gioret no say mamzer. So now we're gonna have two questions with this. This is it didn't say a convert can marry a mamzer here. It said anyone who's forbidden to marry a Kohen is allowed to marry a mamzer. That's basically what the Mishnah said. So uklalahu, if you're gonna plug in anyone who's forbidden to marry is marry a Kohen and not marry anyone, well, klalahu de kol hasurin lavo b'kahal kuna mutarin lavo ze bazeh. Anyone who's forbidden to a Kohen is allowed to marry a mamzer? That's totally not true. Harei almana grusha v'chalala v'zona shasurin lavo b'kahal kuna v'asurin lavo ze bazeh. A widow can't marry a Kohen gadol. A divorcee, a woman who did chalitza, a zona, a chalala. All those women can't marry Kohanim also, just like the Gioret. But none of them are allowed to marry a mamzer. So the rule, the rule in the Mishnah is a general rule. So while we took it from kahal, it doesn't mean kahal, it means kahal. Kohanim doesn't fit. It's not true. And furthermore, something else implied from the Mishnah doesn't make sense according to this. V'tu, and furthermore, hamutar asur. Okay, what does this mean? And we're going to come back to this in another few minutes. So let's get it straight. The Mishnah said whoever's forbidden is permitted, right? Who's forbidden to marry a Kohen right now, we think it is permitted to marry a mamzer or anyone in a problematic category. Just using a mamzer as the example, which implies that anyone who's permitted to marry a Kohen is not allowed to marry a mamzer. So now they say, right, that's mutar asul. If you're permitted to marry a Kohen, then it would be implied from this Mishnah that you're not allowed to marry a mamzer. V'hagir shemutar b'kohenet umutar b'mamzeret. Now, let's take a male convert. A male convert can marry a Kohen, meaning can marry a female Kohenet, a bat Kohen, and yet is also allowed to marry a mamzeret, according to the Tanna Kamma's opinion. So the rule and the opposite of the rule, the inverse of the rule, doesn't work. So basically, we have those two problems with this reading. So to resolve this problem, Rabbanit bar Hoshaya continues in the same lines, but modifies it slightly. He wants to get rid of the divorcee and the widow and all those people who can't marry a Kohen or can't marry a Kohen Gadol, but also can't marry mamzerim. So how does he adapt it a little bit? This is what it says. Kol shekohen asur lisa'et bito. What it means is a Kohen can't marry this person's daughter. Okay, now what are we talking about? We want to still get back to the ger. We want to basically say the machloket in this Mishnah, and this isn't true with the first two interpretations, is we want to just get to ger. Convert can't marry, right, a Kohen, but can marry a mamzer. So, and then Rabbi Yehuda forbids this because Rabbi Yehuda forbids the convert with the mamzer, and then that works perfectly. But how does he resolve the issue of the almana and the grusha and all those? Well, kosher kohen asur lisa'at bito. If the Kohen can't marry this person's daughter, then that person whose daughter can't marry a Kohen can marry a mamzer. Okay, what are we talking about here? Umaynihu ger shenasa giyored uche Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. We're going to see this all in Daf Zayin. There's a big machloket about a convert can't marry a Kohen, right? A female convert. What about the daughter of converts, or the daughter of a male convert, or the daughter of a female convert? Does it continue throughout the generations? So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov has an approach that if two converts marry each other, then the child also can't marry a Kohen, even though the child is a born Jew. But since both parents were converts, the ger can't marry a mamzer. The ger can't marry a Kohen, the gioret. So that daughter. So now, that's basically what the Mishnah is referring to. If a Kohen can't marry your daughter because you are a convert who married also a convert, and then the Kohen can't marry your daughter, well, then you are mutarin lavo ze bazeh. Well, you're a convert, right? You're the father. You're a convert. You can marry a mamzer or a mamzeret, or anyone who's disqualified. So let's read it inside. Hachi kamra. This is the way to read it according to Rabbanit bar Hoshaya. Kol shekohen asur lisa'at bito. If the Kohen can't marry your daughter, what would be the case? ger shenasagi yored u'Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. That would only match his opinion because he says this. Mutarin lavo ze bazeh. Well, that ger whose daughter can't marry a Kohen, he can marry a mamzer. Now we're going to have and then this resolves the divorcee issue, because a divorcee, if I get divorced and I have a child, then after that, like I marry someone else and have a child, that child, of course, can marry a Kohen. They're just the daughter of a divorcee, right? So that removes the whole question from the previous case. To which the Gemara, though, adds another question here. Well, there's more cases of someone whose daughter can't marry a Kohen. What's the classic case where the daughter can't marry a Kohen, but yet that person can't marry a mamzer? Okay, the son of a divorcee and a Kohen is a halal. That halal who marries a bat Yisrael, de Kohen asur lisabito. Now, the halal continues throughout the generations. And there's a big machloket about whether it does or doesn't. We saw this before. But right now, we're going to go by the basic opinion, which is a halal that marries a Jewish woman. The child is also, if they have a daughter, the daughter's a halala and she can't marry a Kohen. So that means there's another case where we have a father whose daughter can't marry a Kohen, but the father can't marry a mamzer. He's a halal, right? A halal is just disqualified, right? It's a problem for kahuna issues, but doesn't mean you're outside the community and you can go marry people like mamzerim. Of course not. So this is going to break the rule. So let's read it again. The Kohen can't marry his daughter, but also can't marry a mamzer. So they say, oh, that's not a problem. Lo kashya. Because we could say that the Mishna follows Rabbi Dostai ben Yehuda, who holds. Now we saw this. That remember, Rabbi Dostai said the Bnei Yisrael are mikveh tahara lechalalim, right? Meaning, if a halal marries a regular Jewish woman who doesn't have a problem, right, like a regular Yisraeli, the daughter of a Yisraeli, she can fix the halal problem, meaning it doesn't go down through the generations. So if you say it's like Rabbi Dostai, then you would say, here you have a case, right? We have a case of a halal, but he actually can marry his daughter off to a Kohen, because as long as he marries a Yisrael, right, a daughter of a Yisrael, that fixes the problem. His daughter's not a halala, so now it's perfect. He is allowed to marry his daughter to a Kohen, and he's forbidden to a mamzer, and that works perfectly. But that's the hamutar asul, right? Someone who's permitted is forbidden to marry a mamzer. But they have a better question. Even according to Rabbi Dostai, what did he say? If a halal marries a bat Yisrael, a good, right, someone who's fine and all that, then it clears up the halal problem. But according to him, what if a halal marries a halala? Okay, we have two children who were born to divorcees and kohanim. Hare halal shenasa halala, which for sure kohen asur lisa bito, right? Now, can a halal and a halala, can they marry, right? So their daughter can't marry a kohen. And according to the Mishna, if the daughter can't marry a Kohen, according to what we're saying here, right, the second interpretation, then they can marry mamzerim. But of course they can't marry mamzerim. They're just halalim. Halalim can't marry mamzerim. So v'asur nami lavo ze bazeh. So that's question number one. Doesn't work here. So we asked a question, we resolved it because of Rabbi Dostai. We could say, fine, a halal with a bat Yisrael, you're right, isn't part of this category. But a halal and a halala, which would be a classic case of your daughter can't marry a Kohen, and yet you're not allowed to marry mamzerim, and then that doesn't fit in the Mishna. And same second question we had last time, v'tu hamutar asul, you can't say if you're permitted to marry off your daughter to a Kohen, then you're forbidden to marry mamzerim. Hare ger shenasa bat Yisrael, a ger who marries a Jewish woman. Remember, we're talking about Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. What did he say? Two converts marry each other and have a daughter. The daughter can't marry a Kohen. But if a convert marries a Jewish woman, right, then she's permitted to marry a Kohen. That's the mutar case. Mutar li sabito, mutarin lavo ze bazeh. And that guy, the convert, he can't, right? Well, what did we say? Anyone whose daughter can marry a Kohen, he is allowed to marry mamzerim, which means anyone whose daughter anyone who can't marry a Kohen, who can't marry his daughter off to a Kohen, can marry a mamzer, which implies anyone who can marry off his daughter to a Kohen, like, for example, a convert who marries a Jewish woman, can marry off his daughter. The second part should be, is forbidden to marry mamzerim, because he can marry his daughter, he's forbidden to marry a mamzer. But he's actually a ger, according to Tanakam, is permitted to marry a mamzer. That was the whole machloket between him and Rabbi Yehuda. So this interpretation doesn't work either. So now we're going to leave thinking that this has to do with Kohanim, and we're going to try a whole different approach. Because the Kohanim thing and trying to get to Ger through saying Kahal men, Kahal Kohanim doesn't work, because there's always things that break that rule. Because again, the Mishnah was a general rule. So you can't say it only applies to convert and doesn't apply there. Third interpretation. El Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rabbi Ravua. The Machloket Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda has to do with a child born to someone who sleeps with his sister and a child born to someone who sleeps with a married woman. What's the difference between them? Well, mamzer, okay, let's talk about, forget the child, just the relationship. A man has a relationship with a married woman, they get the death penalty in court. And there's also karet associated with it, like if the court doesn't penalize. That's the most severe, because the court can kill you. That's severe. The second in severity is karet, is that, a God-given punishment. That's mamzer. That's a relationship. If you sleep with your sister, it doesn't say the court kills you. Okay, you get chenek, strangulation, if you sleep with a married woman, but not if you sleep with your sister. There you just get karet. Karet's serious, but it's not as serious as karet and mitapet. So they're saying that's the machloka between them. So let's read it inside. Tanakama Sava, afilu mamzer machoto nami habi mamzer. If a child is born from an isur karet only, not where there's mitapeting, you're also going to be called a mamzer. Okay, meaning even though it's only isur karet, you're still going to be called a mamzer. That's generally the opinion we've always been talking about. Isur karet causes children to be mamzerim. Rabbi Yehuda savar me'eshet ish have mamzer machoto lo have mamzer. Rabbi Yehuda holds no. Only if it's death by the court or is the child going to be a mamzer. If not, the child's not a mamzer. So now, if that's the case, what's the Mishnah teaching us? My kamashman, if it's teaching us, right, that again, anyone who can't come to the kahal, okay, rename, anyone who doesn't matter if you're only mitapetin, even if you're chayvet karet, then you can, right, then your child's a mamzer, in which case, right, that child can marry another mamzer. But Rabbi Yehuda says, no, they can't, because only if it's mitapetin is it going to be the case, but not if, let's say, a mamzer from your sister. The child born to a man who slept with his sister is not going to be called a mamzer. That's basically what Rabbi Yehuda is saying. When it says Rabbi Yehuda Osir, that's what it means. But if that's the case, my kamashmal and Tanina, that whole thing appears in the Mishnah. We already learned this in Yavamo, you might remember. There's actually a three-way machloket about this. Ezehu mamzer, what's a mamzer? Kol shu b'lo yavo, divrei Rabbi Akiva. That's not even the one we're talking about here, but that's Rabbi Akiva who says even chayve lavu, right? Like any, right, a kohen with a grusha, also the kid's mamzer. Rabbi Shimon, or actually we had a whole debate if he includes Yisurei Kehuna, or is it just Lota says like, right, Yibum and some other ones. Shimon Atimni Omer, Kosh Chayvim Alav Karet B'dei Shamayim. That would match Tanakama by us. Even if it's just Karet, that would create Mamzer, but not Yisurei Lav. V'halacha kidvav, and by the way, they say, and we paskin like him. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, and that's the opinion we always hear. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Kosh Chayvim Alav Mitah Bitin. Rabbi Yoshua says, any mitah beitin only. If it's mitah beitin is the kid a mamzer. So it's the exact same machloket. And number one, why would Rabbi Yehuda Nasi bring two Mishnayot that are the exact same thing? Number two, and there they even have three opinions, so our Mishnah would be totally unnecessary. Number two, if that's the case also, our Tanaim were later. They should have just said, I hold like Rabbi Shimon Atimni, and I hold like Rabbi Yoshua. And then that would have been a better way to say it. So Ella Amarava, so option 3 is rejected as well. Here comes option 4, and with this we'll finish for today. Ella Amarava. Ger Amoni Moavi Ikabinai. What they're arguing about is a Ger Amoni Moavi. Now, Ger Amoni Moavi is not, if a convert from Ammon Moav converts, they're not accepted to marry Jews. Remember, that's what we said. Now, they're not allowed to marry you. But now they say the following. There's a machloket about whether they're asurin lavo b'kahal, they can't marry Jews, but maybe they can marry a mamzer. That's the machloket. And then, right, mutarin lavo. So, Bahachi Kamar, this is the way you read it. Kol asurin lavo b'kahal umayinu. Which asurim are we talking about? Ger Ammoni Moavi, converts from Ammon and Moav. Mutarin lavo zebazeh. They can marry each other. To convert, right? They can marry mamzerim. They can marry people who are outside the community, even though they're Jews, but they're outside the community. So then, Ihachi Amai Rabbi Yehuda Osel. So then what does it mean? So Tanakama says that Rabbi Yehuda forbids. What does that mean? What does he forbid? To which they say, this is how to read the Mishnah. And now we're going to read the Mishnah totally not in the simple reading. The simple reading, until now, we've thought there's two opinions. There's 3, but we've ignored Rabbi Eliezer right now. But there's Tanakama, and then Rabbi Yehuda comes in, is Osel. So to which they say the following: Hachi kamar. Even though Rabbi Yehuda doesn't allow, remember he said Gerim are part of the Kahal Yisrael, they can't marry Mamzeret. But Hanemile Ger de Ra'oi Lavo B'Kahal. Aval Ger Amani Moavi de Ein Ru'yin Lavo B'Kahal. Lo. He comes and says, even though I forbid, right? Even though I forbid a Ger to marry a Mamzeret, specifically a Ger Amani Moavi who's not allowed to come into the Kahal at all, is actually going to be permitted to marry a Mamzeret. Okay, and then the whole thing is talking about a ger, but a very specific ger, a ger amani Moavi. We go back to saying kol asur lavo b'kahal is the general kahal, but it's talking about a particular type of psul, which is the ger who's an amoni Moavi, which can't marry at all, right? Those gerim can't marry the community, but they can marry mamzerim according to Rabbi Yehuda, and that's the Rabbi Yehuda Osir means even though I forbid in general, in this case I permit. It's a little bit really not the simple reading. But that was what we did. So the second part of the daf was all trying to understand this very confusing Mishnah. Again, Rabbi Eliezer we're not dealing with because he's very clear. He's saying a shtuki and a sufi can't marry each other, can't marry a mamzer, all that. Only a mamzer and a mamzer can marry each other, things that are vadan. But the first two opinions really didn't make much sense. And now we basically came up with 4 different explanations. Is it kahal kohanim? Is it a difference between, mamzer of chayve kritu to mamzer chayve beitin? Not the machloka between them, or is it really just saying that Rabbi Yehuda, even though he forbids in general converts to marry, he actually permits, in this case, the convert, the Amoni Moavi, to marry within the community, to marry the mamzerim. That's where we're going to end today. We'll start with this new Braita, which continues on the next page, and tomorrow's daf. Wishing everybody a great day, and hopefully a more peaceful one.